The silence was deafening as Margaret Thatcher reached for her wineglass during that fateful dinner at Windsor Castle in 1982. What she didn't know was that Queen Elizabeth II had just given the most subtle signal in royal dining history, one that would determine the fate of Britain's involvement in the Falklands War. The Queen's left hand rested precisely 2 inches from her bread plate, her index finger extended just enough to catch the light from the crystal chandelier above. To anyone watching, it looked like a moment of casual elegance. To those who understood the ancient language of royal dining protocols, it was a declaration of war. Royal dining etiquette isn't just about knowing which fork to use or how to hold a teacup. It's a sophisticated communication system that has evolved over more than 1,000 years, refined through countless political crises, international negotiations, and family feuds that could shake the foundations of entire nations. Every gesture, every placement of cutlery, every strategic pause carries meaning that goes far beyond simple politeness. The origins of these intricate dining signals can be traced back to medieval times when royal courts were hotbeds of political intrigue, assassination attempts, and power struggles that could erupt without warning. Kings and queens needed ways to communicate with their allies and warn of dangers without alerting their enemies who might be sitting at the very same table. What began as survival tactics gradually evolved into the most sophisticated nonverbal communication system the world has ever known. Take the seemingly innocent act of placing a napkin. In ordinary circumstances, you might simply place it on your lap when you sit down and leave it there until the meal ends. But, in royal dining rooms, the napkin becomes a powerful tool of communication. When Queen Victoria wanted to signal her displeasure with a guest's behavior, she would fold her napkin into precise thirds and place it exactly parallel to the edge of the table. This seemingly minor adjustment would immediately alert her staff that the offending guest should be seated as far as possible from the Queen at future gatherings. But, napkin placement goes much deeper than expressing royal disapproval. During World War II, when sensitive military information couldn't be discussed openly even in private royal dining rooms due to the constant threat of enemy spies, King George VI developed an elaborate napkin code with Winston Churchill. A napkin placed diagonally across the lap meant urgent military matters needed immediate private discussion. A napkin folded and placed to the right of the plate indicated that the conversation should move to safer topics because potentially unfriendly ears were present. The complexity of these signals becomes even more fascinating when you consider the role of silverware positioning. Every royal dining setting includes multiple forks, knives, and spoons, each with its specific purpose and position. But these utensils serve double duty as communication tools that can convey everything from romantic interest to political alliances to outright threats. Princess Margaret was notorious for using her silverware to send messages during formal dinners. When she wanted to signal her boredom with a particular guest's conversation, she would place her soup spoon perpendicular to her bowl, creating a small but unmistakable cross pattern that served as her personal symbol for "rescue me from this tedious discussion." Her dinner companions who knew the signal would immediately introduce new topics or create diversions to save the princess from further social suffering. More dramatically, silverware positioning has been used to prevent international incidents that could have had devastating consequences. During a state dinner in 1961, when President Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy dined with Queen Elizabeth II, a crucial moment arose when sensitive information about British intelligence operations was about to be discussed in front of individuals who shouldn't have access to such classified material. The Queen needed a way to halt the conversation immediately without causing obvious offense or creating suspicion among the potential security risks present at the dinner. Her solution was elegant and invisible to those not trained in royal protocols. She casually reached for her water glass, but instead of lifting it, she rotated it exactly 90 degrees clockwise while maintaining eye contact with President Kennedy. To everyone else at the table, it appeared to be a simple adjustment of her place setting. To Kennedy, who had been briefed on basic royal dining signals before the dinner, it was a clear message that the current conversation needed to end immediately. Kennedy smoothly transitioned the discussion to safer topics about American jazz music, a subject he knew would capture the attention of Princess Margaret, who was known for her love of contemporary music. The potential security breach was averted, and most guests never realized how close they had come to overhearing information that could have compromised ongoing intelligence operations in multiple countries. The strategic use of bread plates represents another layer of this complex communication system. The positioning, touching, and even the way crumbs are arranged can convey detailed messages to those trained to interpret them. Queen Elizabeth II has mastered this particular art form to such a degree that her senior staff can determine her mood, her opinion of various guests, and her preferences for how the evening should proceed simply by observing her interaction with her bread plate throughout the meal. During a particularly tense dinner with foreign diplomats in the 1970s, when delicate negotiations about trade agreements were at a critical juncture, the Queen used her bread plate to orchestrate the entire evening's outcome. By placing small pieces of bread at specific positions around the edge of her plate, she created a coded map that indicated which diplomats should be seated together for the post-dinner discussions, which topics should be avoided, and which negotiation points she was willing to compromise on. Her private secretary, who had worked with the Queen for over 2 decades and could read her bread plate communications as easily as reading a newspaper, discreetly adjusted the evening schedule according to these signals. The result was a series of productive conversations that led to favorable trade agreements worth millions of pounds, all orchestrated through the strategic placement of dinner rolls. The wineglass protocols add yet another dimension to royal dining communications. The timing of sips, the angle at which glasses are held, and even the lipstick marks left on crystal rims can convey specific messages. Princess Diana became particularly skilled at using wineglass positioning to signal her security team when she felt uncomfortable or potentially threatened during public dining events. Her signature signal involved holding her wineglass with both hands while taking a sip, a gesture that appeared to be simple elegance but actually indicated to her protection officers that she wanted an immediate but discreet exit strategy prepared. This signal proved invaluable during several high-profile dinners where potentially dangerous situations were developing, allowing her security team to create diversions and extract her from harm's way without causing public scenes or diplomatic embarrassments. The scandal that rocked Buckingham Palace in 1987 began not with a leaked document or a betrayed confidence, but with a misplaced soup spoon during what should have been a routine diplomatic dinner. The ambassador from a major European nation, unfamiliar with the intricate world of royal dining signals, accidentally positioned his silverware in a pattern that, according to centuries-old palace protocols, constituted a formal challenge to the Queen's authority. The resulting diplomatic crisis took months to resolve and fundamentally changed how foreign guests are prepared for royal dining experiences. This incident highlighted one of the most fascinating aspects of royal dining etiquette, the existence of what palace insiders called danger signals that can instantly transform a pleasant social gathering into a potential international incident. These signals, developed over centuries of royal history, serve as both warning systems and damage control mechanisms that allow experienced royal staff to navigate treacherous social and political waters with remarkable precision. The complexity of these danger signals becomes apparent when examining the role of chair positioning and body language during royal meals. Every movement is carefully observed and interpreted according to established protocols that have been refined through decades of diplomatic entertaining. When Prince Philip wants to signal that a particular guest has overstepped social boundaries, he employs a technique known among palace staff as the lean-back protocol. This involves a precise backward movement of his chair, creating exactly 18 inches of distance between himself and the table, combined with a specific crossing of his arms that positions his hands at predetermined angles. To casual observers, it simply appears that the prince is making himself more comfortable. To trained palace staff, it's an immediate alert that intervention is needed to redirect the conversation or create a distraction before the situation escalates into something more serious. The Queen Mother, during her lifetime, was considered the absolute master of using facial expressions combined with dining gestures to control the atmosphere of formal meals. Her technique involved what she called the gracious redirection, where she would combine a warm smile with specific movements of her teacup and saucer to signal approval or disapproval of topics being discussed around the table. When she wanted to encourage a particular line of conversation, she would hold her teacup with both hands while maintaining eye contact with the speaker, indicating to other guests that this topic had royal approval and should be explored further. Conversely, when discussions ventured into territory she deemed inappropriate, she would place her teacup down with a barely audible but precisely timed sound against the saucer, creating what palace staff recognized as the gentle warning. Guests who understood this signal would immediately shift to safer topics, while those who missed the cue would find themselves gradually excluded from the conversation as other guests began directing their attention elsewhere. The strategic use of food interaction represents another sophisticated layer of royal dining communication. The way royals cut their meat, the pace at which they eat specific courses, and even the manner in which they arrange food on their plates can convey detailed messages about their thoughts, concerns, and intentions for the evening ahead. King Charles, then Prince of Wales, developed his own unique system during the 1990s that he used particularly effectively during environmental summits and charity galas. When he wanted to signal strong approval for a guest's charitable initiatives or environmental proposals, he would eat his vegetables first, leaving other components of his meal untouched until the vegetables were completely finished. This seemingly minor dietary choice actually communicated to other guests and potential donors that the prince viewed the speaker's cause as worthy of serious consideration and financial support. The results of these subtle endorsements were often dramatic. Guests who received the vegetables first signal frequently found themselves surrounded by interested potential supporters during the post-dinner socializing period. Several major environmental charities have traced their most significant donations back to dinners where they received this particular royal endorsement, even though many donors were unaware they were responding to a carefully orchestrated signal rather than their own spontaneous generosity. The most intricate aspect of royal dining protocols involves the coordination of signals between multiple family members during large formal gatherings. These synchronized communications allow the royal family to manage complex social situations, coordinate their responses to sensitive topics, and present unified positions on important issues without ever appearing to engage in obvious consultation or planning. During state banquets, where hundreds of guests from multiple countries gather in Buckingham Palace's Grand Ballroom, the royal family employs what insiders call the symphony system. Each member of the family has specific responsibilities for monitoring different sections of the gathering, and they use predetermined dining signals to share information and coordinate their actions throughout the evening. Princess Anne, known for her practical approach to royal duties, typically takes responsibility for monitoring military and sporting guests. Her signals focus primarily on timing and coordination rather than content evaluation. When she places her knife and fork in parallel positions on her plate, it indicates that her section of guests is ready for the next phase of the evening's program. When she leaves her knife and fork in a crossed position, it signals that additional time is needed for important conversations to conclude before the evening progresses. Prince Andrew, during his active royal duties period, specialized in monitoring business and trade representatives. His signaling system involved the strategic use of his water glass and bread plate to indicate which business discussions were progressing favorably and which needed additional royal attention or intervention. A water glass moved to the left side of his place setting indicated successful negotiations that should be allowed to continue without interruption. A bread plate rotated 45 degrees clockwise signaled that immediate royal attention was needed to salvage struggling business discussions. The coordination becomes even more sophisticated when international tensions or sensitive political situations require the royal family to present carefully calculated responses during formal dinners. During the challenging period of Brexit negotiations, royal dining events became crucial opportunities for unofficial diplomatic communications that couldn't take place through normal government channels. The Queen developed a complex system of signals that allowed her to convey British positions on various aspects of the Brexit negotiations without making direct political statements that would violate her constitutional role as a neutral monarch. These signals were so subtle that most guests remained unaware they were witnessing sophisticated diplomatic communications, yet they were detailed enough to provide valuable insights to those trained to interpret them. Her technique involved the strategic timing of her movements between courses. During the soup course, her interactions with European guests indicated Britain's willingness to maintain cooperative relationships regardless of political changes. The way she handled her fish knife during the second course conveyed information about trade priorities and economic concerns. Her dessert spoon positioning communicated Britain's intentions regarding future diplomatic protocols and international agreements. European diplomats who understood these signals were able to report back to their governments with nuanced understandings of British positions that proved invaluable during the complex negotiation process. Several breakthrough moments in the Brexit discussions have been traced back to insights gained during these carefully orchestrated royal dining events, where apparent social pleasantries actually served as crucial diplomatic communications. The emergency protocols represent the most serious aspect of royal dining signal systems. These are the communications used when immediate action is required to address security threats, medical emergencies, or rapidly developing political crises that could have serious consequences if not handled with extreme discretion and speed. The night that changed everything happened during a seemingly ordinary dinner at Sandringham House in 1994. Princess Diana sat across from Prince Charles as they hosted a gathering of international charity leaders, their marriage already crumbling behind closed doors but their public facade still carefully maintained. What none of the guests realized was that they were witnessing one of the most sophisticated displays of royal dining warfare ever recorded, a silent battle fought entirely through strategic placement of cutlery, calculated timing of sips, and devastating combinations of facial expressions and hand movements. The evening began innocuously enough, but experienced palace staff immediately recognized the signs of an impending confrontation. Diana had chosen to wear her sapphire bracelet, a piece Charles had given her during happier times, but she wore it on her right wrist instead of her traditional left. In royal dining protocol, jewelry placement serves as a complex communication system, and this particular choice sent a clear message to those who understood. She was preparing to challenge established expectations and assert her independence. Charles responded by positioning his wineglass exactly 4 inches to the right of its traditional placement, a signal that indicated he was prepared to defend his position regardless of the social consequences. To their guests, these appeared to be minor personal preferences. To the trained palace staff observing the dinner, it was clear that a significant confrontation was inevitable, and they began implementing subtle damage control measures to protect their guests from becoming unwilling participants in royal domestic warfare. The battle intensified during the second course when Diana employed what palace historians now recognize as one of the most brilliant displays of dining signal manipulation ever recorded. She began cutting her food into increasingly smaller pieces while maintaining animated conversation with the charity leaders, her smile never wavering even as her knife work became more aggressive and precise. This technique, known among royal staff as the precision protocol, served multiple purposes simultaneously. First, it demonstrated her complete emotional control despite the mounting tension, proving to Charles that she could maintain her composure under any circumstances. Second, the methodical nature of her food preparation created a rhythmic distraction that kept guests focused on her rather than any subtle responses Charles might attempt. Finally, the increasing precision of her cuts served as a clear threat, indicating that she was prepared to dissect any arguments or justifications he might offer with the same meticulous attention to detail. Charles attempted to counter with his own sophisticated response, employing a technique he had learned from observing his mother during particularly challenging state dinners. He began adjusting his tie at precisely timed intervals, each movement coordinated with specific points in the evening's conversation. These adjustments appeared to be simple grooming gestures, but they actually conveyed detailed information to his personal staff about how the evening should proceed and which guests should be prioritized for his attention during the post-dinner socializing period. However, Diana was prepared for this strategy and responded with what palace insiders consider one of the most devastating dining signal combinations in royal history. She excused herself to powder her nose between courses, a perfectly acceptable social gesture, but she left her napkin folded in a specific triangular pattern that indicated to trained observers that she was preparing to make a significant announcement or revelation upon her return. The tension in the room became palpable, though most guests remained unaware of the source of their growing discomfort. Experienced palace staff immediately began implementing contingency protocols, quietly adjusting lighting levels to create a more relaxed atmosphere and strategically repositioning floral arrangements to create natural conversation barriers that would limit the potential spread of whatever bombshell Diana was preparing to deliver. When Diana returned to the table, she had transformed her entire approach to the evening's dining signals. Instead of engaging in continued warfare with Charles, she began directing all of her communication toward their guests, effectively excluding her husband from the sophisticated signal network that had been operating throughout the evening. This technique, known as diplomatic isolation, represented a nuclear option in royal dining protocol because it demonstrated complete rejection of the traditional hierarchy that governed royal family interactions. Her new strategy involved creating alliance networks with specific guests through carefully coordinated dining signals that bypassed Charles entirely. She would make eye contact with particular charity leaders while adjusting her earrings in specific patterns, communications that indicated her personal support for their causes regardless of official royal family positions. She coordinated her drinking and eating pace with guests she wanted to favor, creating subliminal bonds that would influence their perceptions of the royal family's internal dynamics. The most remarkable aspect of Diana's performance was her ability to maintain these complex communications while continuing to serve as a gracious hostess, ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and valued despite the psychological warfare taking place at the head table. Several charity leaders later commented on the extraordinary energy and engagement they felt during the dinner, completely unaware that they had been carefully selected as allies in a royal domestic dispute through sophisticated nonverbal communication techniques. Charles found himself in an impossible position. Any attempt to reassert his authority through traditional dining signals would appear obvious and aggressive to their guests, potentially damaging his public image and the reputation of the monarchy itself. Diana had effectively trapped him in a situation where his only options were to accept her dominance for the evening or risk creating a public scene that could have devastating consequences for the royal family's carefully maintained public facade. The resolution came during the dessert course when Charles made a decision that surprised everyone familiar with royal dining protocols. Instead of continuing the battle or accepting defeat, he chose to acknowledge Diana's superior strategy through a gesture of unprecedented respect. He raised his wineglass in what appeared to be a simple toast to their guest's charitable work, but the specific timing and manner of his gesture actually constituted a formal acknowledgement of Diana's tactical victory according to centuries-old royal dining traditions. Diana's response was equally gracious and devastating. She accepted his acknowledgement with a smile that appeared genuinely warm to their guests, while her own wineglass positioning indicated that she understood his concession but reserved the right to resume hostilities at any time of her choosing. The message was clear: she had won this battle decisively, and both of them knew it. The evening concluded with what guests remembered as one of the most successful charity dinners they had ever attended, completely unaware that they had witnessed a pivotal moment in the breakdown of one of the most famous marriages in modern history. The sophisticated dining signal battle they had unknowingly observed represented a turning point in Diana's relationship with the royal family, demonstrating her mastery of the same communication techniques that had been used to marginalize and control her during the early years of her marriage. Palace staff who witnessed the dinner later described it as a masterclass in royal dining strategy, with Diana demonstrating abilities that rivaled those of the Queen Mother herself. The technique she employed that evening would later be studied and adapted by other members of the royal family, fundamentally changing how internal disputes were managed during formal entertaining periods. The long-term consequences of that dinner extended far beyond the immediate relationship between Charles and Diana. The charity leaders who attended became some of Diana's most devoted supporters in her later humanitarian work, relationships that were forged through her strategic use of dining signals to create personal connections that transcended traditional royal protocol. The secret that palace staff whispered about for decades finally emerged during a remarkable dinner at Windsor Castle in 2003, when Queen Elizabeth II performed what insiders now recognize as the most complex dining signal sequence ever recorded. The occasion was a private dinner with Tony Blair and other world leaders, but the real drama unfolded through an intricate dance of teacup positioning, strategic pause timing, and coordinated movements that revealed the existence of an advanced royal communication system that had been hidden from public view for over 3 centuries. The evening began with what appeared to be standard royal hospitality, but trained observers immediately noticed that the Queen had chosen to use the Dresden china set, a decision that seemed purely aesthetic to guests but actually indicated to her staff that highly sensitive political discussions would take place and that maximum discretion protocols should be implemented. The choice of china was just the beginning of a sophisticated preparation process that would transform the dining room into a secure communication environment. What made this dinner extraordinary was the revelation of what palace historians called the deep protocols, advanced dining signal techniques that are typically reserved for the most critical situations facing the monarchy. These signals go far beyond simple communication and actually allow for complex strategy coordination, real-time intelligence sharing, and sophisticated manipulation of guest behavior without their awareness or consent. The Queen's mastery of these deep protocols became apparent during the first course when she began implementing what insiders know as the circle of influence technique. This involves creating concentric rings of communication around the dining table, with different signal systems operating simultaneously at various levels of proximity to the monarch. Guests seated closest to the Queen received different information than those positioned further away, allowing for multiple conversations and negotiations to proceed simultaneously without interfering with each other. Tony Blair, seated to the Queen's right, found himself receiving signals through her manipulation of her soup spoon that conveyed detailed information about Britain's position on upcoming European Union negotiations. The Queen would pause her eating at specific moments, creating silent intervals that corresponded to topics Blair should emphasize or avoid during his upcoming diplomatic meetings. She would adjust the angle of her spoon against her bowl to indicate the degree of flexibility Britain was willing to show on various negotiation points. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary, positioned 3 seats away, was receiving entirely different information through the Queen's strategic use of her bread plate and water glass. These signals focused on intelligence matters and security concerns that required immediate attention but couldn't be discussed openly even in this private setting. The Queen's ability to maintain these parallel communication streams while continuing to serve as a gracious hostess demonstrated a level of sophistication that amazed even veteran palace staff. The most remarkable aspect of the deep protocols involves the Queen's ability to influence guest behavior through subliminal dining cues that operate below the level of conscious awareness. During this particular dinner, she employed techniques that guided specific guests toward desired conclusions about policy matters without them realizing they were being influenced. Her method involved coordinating her own dining pace with strategic environmental adjustments orchestrated by her staff. When she wanted a particular guest to feel confident about a policy position, she would eat at the same rhythm as that guest while subtle changes in lighting and background music created a subconsciously comfortable atmosphere that encouraged bold thinking and decisive action. Conversely, when she wanted guests to approach topics with greater caution, She would deliberately eat more slowly than their natural pace while environmental factors were adjusted to create a subtle sense of unease that encouraged more careful consideration of complex issues. Several major policy decisions made by Blair's government can be traced back to influences they experienced during these carefully orchestrated dining experiences, though they remained completely unaware of how their thinking had been shaped. The technical complexity of managing these multiple signal systems simultaneously requires years of training and practice. The Queen works with a small team of senior staff members who have been specially trained in what palace insiders call dining signal coordination. These individuals position themselves throughout the dining room where they can observe the Queen's signals and implement corresponding environmental and service adjustments that support her communication objectives. During the 2003 dinner, one of these coordinators noticed that the Queen was beginning to implement what they recognized as the Revelation Protocol, a rare and sophisticated technique used when extremely sensitive information needs to be communicated without creating any permanent record of the conversation. This protocol involves using dining signals to guide guests through a logical progression of thoughts and conclusions, allowing them to arrive at classified information through their own reasoning rather than being directly told state secrets. The Queen began this process by positioning her wineglass in a pattern that indicated to her coordinators that they should begin implementing subtle memory enhancement techniques. These involve specific combinations of lighting, music, and service timing that improve guests' ability to remember important details while simultaneously making it difficult for them to recall exactly how they learned those details. As the evening progressed, the Queen used increasingly sophisticated silver positioning to guide Tony Blair and other key guests toward understanding critical intelligence information about emerging global threats. Her technique involved creating logical connections between publicly available information and classified details, using her dining signals to highlight specific aspects of their existing knowledge while subtly introducing new elements that completed the intelligence picture. The result was that by the end of the evening, Britain's key political leaders possessed crucial information about international security threats and economic vulnerabilities, but they experienced this knowledge as insights they had developed through careful analysis rather than classified briefings. This technique allows the monarch to share essential information with political leaders while maintaining the constitutional fiction that she remains politically neutral and doesn't influence government policy. The most closely guarded aspect of the deep protocols involves what palace historians refer to as the legacy signals, communications that are designed to influence behavior and decision-making long after the dining event has concluded. These signals work by creating specific psychological associations between dining experiences and particular policy positions or strategic approaches. During the 2003 dinner, the Queen employed legacy signals that would influence how Tony Blair and other attendees approached crucial decisions about military interventions, economic policies, and international relationships for years to come. She achieved this by coordinating specific combinations of sensory experiences, wine selections, food presentations, and conversational topics that created powerful memory associations linking positive emotional states with particular strategic approaches. The effectiveness of these techniques became apparent over the following months as Blair's government consistently made policy choices that aligned with long-term British strategic interests, even when those choices appeared to contradict their stated political priorities or popular opinion. Several former government officials have privately acknowledged experiencing strange feelings of confidence or unease when considering various policy options, without understanding that these emotional responses were carefully programmed during royal dining experiences. The existence of these advanced dining signal systems raises fascinating questions about the true extent of royal influence on British government policy. While the monarchy's official role is purely ceremonial, the deep protocols suggest that the Queen possesses sophisticated tools for shaping political decisions through psychological influence techniques that operate entirely outside normal constitutional frameworks. The training required to master these techniques takes decades to complete, and only a handful of senior royal staff members are granted access to the complete system. The Queen herself learned many of these skills from her mother, who had refined them during World War II when unofficial royal influence on government policy was considered essential for national survival. The techniques were further developed during the Cold War period when traditional diplomatic channels were insufficient for managing the complex global threats facing Britain and its allies.